Great.
Okay, looks like we are in the webinar now. So yeah, good morning, afternoon, and evening to all our attendees across the globe. I'd like to give you all a warm welcome to the Redefining Education in the AI Era panel. We will be focusing on the humanities and the social sciences. Our agenda is essentially to cover the transforming landscape of K12 education in this age of AI and evaluate learning progress to boost teaching success, right? We will also cover the important aspect of ethics, plagiarism, and what role AI is, or rather should play in shaping the future, right? So yeah, my name is Konal Dingreja, and I am a rising junior at the University of Illinois studying electrical engineering. I will be the moderator for this session, and I would encourage all our attendees to ask our panelists any questions they have in the chat down there. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive right in. We are joined by Jon Gold, who is in his 18th year teaching history in the middle school at Moses Brown School, situated in the beautiful city of Providence, Rhode Island. John is currently the clerk of Moses Brown's Professional Development Committee and the AI Working Group as well. His writing has appeared at Learning for Justice and various other outlets. John has a BA in Religious Studies from Brown University and an MA in School Leadership from Teachers College, Columbia University. Welcome, John. And we are also joined by Sarah Cooper, who teaches 8th US History and Civics and is Associate Head of School at Flintridge Prep School in Canada, California. She's also the author of 2 books, Creating Citizens, Teaching Civics and Current Events in the History Classroom, and Making History Mine, and writes for educational sites including MiddleWeb, Education Week, and Well Schooled. Earlier this year, OpenAI solicited her feedback in developing a white paper on educator considerations for ChatGPT. So at least I'm blown away by the experienced educators we have on here. And I'm pretty excited to see the slides and the ideas they have to present on here. So welcome once again. I guess we could start with Jon Gold to present his slides and share his ideas.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks all for joining us. It's a great honor to be here. It's nice to be with people who actually want to talk about AI, since everyone in my life is sick of hearing me talk about AI. So I'm really glad to be here with all of you. You can see here the title of my presentation, Teaching and Learning with and Around Generative AI. And I'll come back to that theme as we get into it. And I put a link here to the slides and then the QR code as well. I'm not sure how folks are accessing things. And I tried to put the QR code on that link in various points throughout the presentation. And everything in here I would love to see out in the world. So feel free to screenshot, to use in your own workshops, to use and abuse and steal. I want to get everything out there as best as I can. Just by way of introduction, I know I am a history teacher. I teach 8th grade history at Moses Brown School in Providence. It might be my 18th year. And I just want to tell a quick story just to bring you all into sort of how I think about all these things. When I was in 5th grade, my mom decided to go back to graduate school, and she got her master's in instructional technology. As someone who's at that time, she was around in her mid 50s. And she just loved computers and loved school and figured that was what she wanted to do as she sort of embraced having a career after having been a stay-at-home mom for me and my brothers. And so as a kid, I was around someone who was just thinking constantly about educational technology, but hadn't been a teacher, hadn't been in schools for very long, and sort of came to it pretty late and jumped in with 2 feet and really came to love and appreciate this sort of ways that tech can infuse education. And so I took from that experience this understanding that technology is a tool for lots of things, but mostly it can be a tool in the classroom for deepening our connections with one another, and allowing sort of the human side of the humanities to come through. And so whenever I get to talk about this stuff, I like thinking about my own mom. I also want to add that I'm not a programmer. I don't know how to do anything with any of this stuff other than play around with it with kids and teaching. And so I think that's important for folks to know as well. I start here with this Venn diagram to sort of set the stage that there's a lot of discourse about AI out in the world. I certainly read and listen to a lot of things, and you'll see a lot of those links throughout this short slideshow. But I do think it's possible to be there in the middle of these spheres. And so I'd really like to dwell down in that bottom right. I think it's bottom right for me. I don't know if it is for you, around AI having some really exciting uses and applications, which I'm sure is why many of you are here today. So we'll get to that. My questions for us are these, what does this technology change about what we do in the classroom? I'm super fascinated by this question of what does learning about artificial intelligence teach us about human intelligence? And then this larger sort of meta question about schools being ready for this age of generative AI. And then a deeper question, which I think this technology really invites us to consider and reconsider, is what is teaching? And I'd like to posit that teaching is creating the conditions for students to learn. And I think when you think of teaching that way, you can see tools, generative AI tools, less as a threat to teaching and more as another way to help create the conditions for students to learn. So I'd like to have participants sort of keep that in mind as we move through here. I also like thinking about this stuff in a broader perspective. And so I think it's important for us to realize that while generative AI feels new and feels different and seems sort of to be a departure from things, it's actually continuous with a lot of changes we've seen in tech and in ed tech in particular. And so AI, as you know, is embedded in lots of things people already use. We have been living in an age of technological change for what feels like a long time, but actually isn't. And so as we see AI sort of infused in various places, obviously, we see it coming here to Google, coming to Khan Academy and Duolingo, things I know folks have been thinking about the past couple of days. But I wanted to show you just this screenshot. This is from a presentation I gave 10 years ago, Shift into Drive, using Google Drive to enhance the humanities curriculum. This was 10 years ago that a colleague and I stood up at a conference and tried to explain to educators how to use the cloud to store documents and work collaboratively. And so I offer that just as a reminder that we're living in a time of broader change, but that this generative AI stuff is, I think, continuous with some of the other changes that we have seen. So what I'd like to do in the rest of my presentation is sort of give you like a little bit of a scoop out of all the various conversations and things I think are unfolding in this space. So folks have probably seen this. This is sort of something I'm offering, I think, to participants, the idea of prompting and how to work with generative AI in that way. This to me is a skill that I'll be working on with my students throughout the school year, really figuring out how to use these tools well. And so a colleague and I came up with this, and I think stole it from somewhere else too, as these things go. And so I just offer these as things for folks to take home as they're thinking about how to scaffold a curriculum around using these tools. But what I really want to focus on here is how, as a teacher, I'm imagining using some of these tools. And so you'll see here, there's a long list. I'm going to focus on the first one and the last one here, but for folks who have access to the slideshow, you can click on those links and there's some embedded videos and some other links in there that might be of use. For me, the gift of these tools, and I'm talking in particular, I think about the text-based tools like ChatGPT, is I'm using them as a way of sort of giving them the positionality of my students when they encounter material that we're using in the classroom. And so as a proxy for student cognition, I write a lot of the materials that I use in my classroom, and I often have a really hard time gauging how well my students will understand it. I can feed it to ChatGPT with some parameters around thinking of it as an 8th grader and get some really helpful feedback. Are these main ideas clear? And so I want to sort of posit that we can use it as a sort of filtering device as teachers are creating content and creating curriculum. Another use that I'm super excited about is just for fun. I think there's a lot of overheated rhetoric around generative AI, and I think there's some fun things you can do with it that I think teachers would benefit from using. So I saw this example from Alec Koros, whom some of you may be familiar with, and he had ChatGPT basically make vocabulary definitions using the most difficult and complex language possible. And so you can see some examples here of just how to play around with language. And I think as teachers, we don't do enough play and enough sort of whimsy. And so I'm excited to think about these tools less as like, I'm giving over my entire curriculum and turning over, my thinking and my students' thinking to these things, and more as a clever entry ticket or a clever way to think about vocabulary. And so you can see that kind of tool. And then another way that I've experimented. I use the game Taboo a lot in my classroom for vocabulary development. And so I played around with having ChatGPT help me make these taboo cards for vocabulary words that we would use in class. And it came out with some really great suggestions and some other ways to think about the words that I hadn't thought of. So again, just trying to give you a sense of how I'm thinking about using this in my classroom. Obviously, there's a lot here to think about for students and how they might encounter these tools and use them to support their learning. I'm sure some of these will be very familiar to you. This again comes from Alec Koros, the idea that ChatGPT and other generative AI tools are reasoning engines, not a fact engine, I think is a pretty important rule or approach to use. And so thinking about what that would look like with students. And I loved this example that I'll show you here. Oops, it went to a thing. There it is. That I'll show here. This is actually from OpenAI's, one of their white papers on how to use ChatGPT in the classroom. And you can see here prompt about basically prompting it to be a Socratic tutor. And so I was really excited about this because I think it gets away from just give me the answer and more into helping students see how to learn from and with this kind of technology. Again, I know I'm going fast. So I think I only have about 10 minutes spot. That's correct? Okay, so I'll go through that. And then this is another tool I wanted to, or a resource rather, I wanted to share with folks. This is sort of, I think, the thing I would hope people would see here out of this workshop and conversation. I worked on this with a colleague named Jen Stouffer at the Hopkins School, and then she did a lot of great formatting on it. But what you see here is a flow chart that I will be using with my students to help them figure out how and when to use these kinds of tools. And so for me, if I start with teaching as creating the conditions for students to learn, and then that these tools are continuous with some of the other changes that we've seen in technology, whether it's social media, Wikipedia, et cetera. This is another tool for reflection and metacognition. And so you can see here a series of questions that students would ask themselves as they decide whether or not to use these kinds of tools for a learning task. And again, if the gold standard is helping students think about what they're learning, understand what they're learning, set goals, reflect, all those things, then I think this is yet another way to sort of get them into that kind of work. I know some folks here are interested in the academic integrity question as well. And so, I think naming that it's a big challenge to detect AI created material. And so I think to me, the answer is less about sort of the chasing game where you have ChatGPT or GPT-0, which can look for AI detection, and then GPT-1, which gets right around that. To me, this is a cat and mouse game. And the better approach is obviously, I think, to teach students to get in the habit of documenting and reflecting on their uses of these tools. Otherwise, I think we're going to lose a chance to help them get better at learning and completing the tasks that we ask them to. So I have some thoughts here just about sort of the AI proofing. I think, Sarah, I know this might be some in your presentation as well, but really thinking about the norms around integrity, sourcing, and attribution, and then this metacognitive reflection. I know that the teachers in the audience will be familiar with that concept and hopefully embracing that as an approach in the classroom. But I think encouraging students to play around and then think about what felt different and think about how they're using tools and how it's helping them meet learning goals seems to me to be the better approach. And so there's some thoughts here on that. I'm just very much mindful of time. I'm also really, as I mentioned earlier, as a humanist, fascinated by this question of what can they do on their screen so that when they turn their screens off, we can have better and richer conversations in the classroom. And I think there's a lot of potential in that. And then just finally, I think educators like my mom did when I was in 3rd grade or 5th grade, just jump in. I think there's a lot of fun to be had and a lot of exploration to be done there. I think too, there's a real provocation in if an AI can do your assignment, it's not a good enough assignment. And so I'm interested in that line of thinking. As I teach at a Quaker school, and so a lot of our work is grounded in human connection and relationship. And so I think using AI to support those goals rather than seeing them as in tension with one another. And then another piece that I just want to name too is that using any of these tools well requires you to read and write well, I believe, in order to understand what the output is and what you're getting from it and how you can get what you need from it. And so it seems like a call to actually focus more on those kinds of skills. And so my big thought is I think this stuff will be a threat to education if we allow it to be. And so I guess that's what we're here to discuss in the remaining part of our time together. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, John. I would really like to say that I really appreciated the Venn diagram that we had at the beginning of the presentation, even the initialisms like prompt, that was very interesting. So yeah, good presentation. Would Sarah like to share her screen and present her point of view?
Great, thank you so much. All right. Here. Okay, and John, I really enjoyed hearing everything you were saying, especially about creating conditions for students to learn and all the practical ideas you gave. That was fantastic. So thank you so much.
And I also feel that the way John approached the idea that like how can educators think about like how AI can help them, you know, and like the grading process, or even like understand like student psychology, like why do they cheat, and you know why do they use AI when they do. So I feel that's very important, and a very important point for a lot of the educators on here to note. So yeah.
Absolutely, thanks so much. All right, so I think a number of the themes that I talk about will overlap with what John said. We're both 8th grade teachers. We found out before this started, which is really one of the best ages. Students are just on the brink of so many things and asking lots of questions that we sometimes can answer and sometimes can't. And so that's what's been so exciting about AI for me and dealing with ChatGPT is that we are learning along with our students, which is the most exciting way to teach. Just a little bit about me. I've taught for more than 20 years, mostly middle school. I teach youth history and civics, and I'm also academic dean, associate head of school at a 7 through 12 school. So I get to see curriculum both on the ground level with these 13 and 14-year-olds every day, and also from the administrative level in curricular planning. And I've written a couple of books about middle school history teaching as well. So every day you open the paper and you see cautionary headlines everywhere. And I think like John, I'm going to come from more of a spin of positivity, but it really is something when you look at the headlines that are out there. And I think what I've seen over the course of this year at my school and reading and talking to parents and students is that at first there was more of a, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And now I think there's much more positivity of how can we integrate this into learning and into the world that students will need to use. So definitely thinking positive is something I'm doing, and sitting side by side with 8th graders and answering their questions takes us a long way. So I wanted to talk about first student voices, 8th graders wondering aloud about AI. Second, rethinking school. So also, as John was saying, how can we ChatGPT proof assignments, or at least try to make them so it's less easy to use ChatGPT? And then future proofing. So which skills will our students need for the future? So student voices, those are actually some of my students. I tried to find one where you couldn't see their faces. And so they're very diligently at work from last year. So I wanted to show you 3 excerpts from student current events presentations. In my class, every student does a current events presentation once a quarter. And so 3 or 4 students a week. And they write up a summary of an article and then talk about why they chose it. And then most excitingly, they lead a discussion about it. So I wanted to show you about 25% of the students' current events in the 2nd semester last year were about AI, and many more of them just brought in current events articles that they didn't present on AI. So as you can see, this one is from Adrian, and it was about a reporter who cloned herself with AI, fooling her bank and her family on the phone with her voice. And Adrian really took this personally and said it could be someone as basic as your mom, but it could be a deep fake, and that's really creepy. Let me show you another 8th grader's voice. This is about doctors using AI to answer patient questions. And this is from Daniel, and he's fascinated in all kinds of science and medical field. And you can see that his mom went to urgent care before AI. They didn't give her a great diagnosis, but it's come a long way since then. And he's looking forward to maybe using that in his job eventually. And then Charlotte, if big brands copied their work, what are artists to do? Obviously copyright with artists and screenwriters and actors and all of that. We live in LA, I live in LA, and the writer's strike is a big deal here. And Charlotte actually is somebody who she would stay in at break every day during class, and I'd say, how you doing? And she'd talk to me about the latest manga figures that she was drawing. And so she's a beautiful artist and very interested in this just personally about what's going to happen with original artwork and creators and firewalls and all of that. So those were some voices from 8th graders. You can see that they are very engaged in AI. And I wanted to think about this current events presentation just as a test case for how to redesign assignments so that ChatGPT can't do them, or it's less easy for ChatGPT or other language model to do. And before we do that, I wanted to just play an excerpt from the daily. Some of you may have heard this. This is Suspicion, Cheating, and Bans AI Hits America's Schools. I think this was about a month ago. And I'm going to just play an excerpt for you, and I'll come back to the screen as well so you can read it as it goes.
So I feel it's emphasis on grading and GPA that pushes students to use whatever means that they can.
College, we pay hella money, right? We're just trying to get that's it, credentials. It's like, I'm stressed. I really need to get this degree so I can get a job, so I can like survive. Oh man, oh. So when that's your mindset, then it's really hard to like be like, oh, no, let's learn, buddy, yeah.
So you can hear from that excerpt that there are many students who will see this as just contractual. They are in school to get a degree, and they are going to use ChatGPT if they think they won't get caught to do whatever they can to get that degree. But I think, as John was alluding to, we need to think about student motivation, and especially in the K-12 realm, and then obviously in college as well, but especially when they're younger, try to show them that motivation is really important. Like, why do you want to learn? What will this give you for the rest of your life? So let's look at what I'm going to do with the 8th graders to try to give them a sense of how to do an assignment in a way that maybe ChatGPT won't be as helpful with, rather than give them gotchas, creating assignments that are more relevant and less AI-able. So here's an 8th grade current events presentation pre-ChatGPT. And this is an actual presentation from March. So ChatGPT was around, but I hadn't revised my assignment yet. And obviously it would be easy to just paste in an article from whatever paper you are using and ask ChatGPT to summarize, which is what I asked students to do before, 150 or more words. I graded it on the quality of paraphrasing, not going to do that anymore, and give a reason for choosing the article. Going beyond, I found it interesting. And just if you're interested in grading the oral presentation, I use Eric Palmer's PV Legs acronym from a book called Well Spoken, Teaching Speaking to All Students. So poise, voice, life, eye contact, gestures, and speed. So this is pre-ChatGPT, pretty standard. I've used this for 10 years. It's been great, but post-ChatGPT, here's what I'm trying. I'm going to try this in just a few weeks when school starts. So a much shorter summary, 5 or more key bullet points, a much longer reason for choosing the article. And I tried doing this with ChatGPT, and it wasn't very good at bringing in specific personal details from somebody's life. So I think this is still pretty good for students to do on their own. Brief impact on how it could affect our present and future, and I'm really going to encourage them to be personal again. And for this summary, I would imagine some of them might use ChatGPT, but I'm going to say you need to be able to answer questions about it, and you also need to be able to define terms at the beginning. So if there's a term people don't know, I'm going to ask them to define it. In addition, you can see down here, there'll be required article annotations by hand or in Google Docs, which I used to require but hadn't, and I'm going to bring those back. And then talking fluidly and answering extensive questions during the presentation. So as you can see, in revamping assignments, a couple of things to keep in mind are to ask for personal explanation of why an idea is important. This is especially helpful in the humanities. Ask for students to show human connection by leading discussion, having persuasive speaking, connecting with the audience. And then asking for a record or a search log, a trail of thought of where students found their information. This could also include annotations. And I did have students give a record of their search last year in doing a research project or a former research project that I've done for a long time, and that was very helpful. And they said, I used ChatGPT, here's the screenshot, I used JSTOR, I used ProQuest, these other databases, I used the free web, and here's what I found. So future-proofing, which skills will our middle and high school students need for a future that honestly right now everyone is guessing at? There's a lot out there, but nobody knows. So here are some thoughts. How can we move from the basic to the lovely and futuristic in terms of student skills? And this is a slide that I thought a lot about. And these are key human skills in an AI world. And these are skills that I hope, I think, I believe students will still need and will be valuable. So starting from storytelling in the upper left and going clockwise, storytelling, being able to connect the dots, to tell narratives, to take an event that happened to you in one place, connect it to a news story, connect it to what your brother did, connect it to something in history. AI can do that, but I think that there's a creative spirit that will remain a human flair. Writing to discover. I'm going to tell my students a lot that we write in order to know what we think, that we write in order to learn to think. We write in order to discover. And so if we can convince our students of that, that would be great. Adrian, who brought in the article about cloning a reporter's voice, she said, what if my doctor went all through school and cheated on everything using ChatGPT and then didn't know anything? And so I'm also going to use that with my students for motivation. Persuasive speaking, I think one-to-one, that will still be an important skill, or one-to-many in a classroom. Of course, there are deepfake videos and deepfake audio. That's a whole different point, but in my classroom, I'm going to say to students, you need to be able to persuade people. Discerning among ideas, trying to decide what is important and what is not. A lot of companies are hiring AI directors to do just this. And then finally, humor, play, and fun. I think that this very human skill or trait of having a good time, being lighthearted, will continue to lead us down the path of curiosity and creativity. And let me finish up with final thoughts from an 8th grader. This is from Mason. And he was early on, he had AI stories all year, even in the fall. And he said, with gusto, we can confidently say AI generation is the highlight of scientific and technological advancement in our modern era. How could you not love that? How could you not want to follow that up with 8th graders, with any of your students, and be on the journey with them? At the end, I have information about where I am. I'm trying to get my Threads account going, but everybody still seems to be on Twitter. So we'll see where that goes. Thank you so much, and I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Sarah. I got a lot out of that. One thing that I would really like to highlight is something that I resonate with. So I have this idea, right? Like this, what makes me human? Okay, like every high school kid, every all of my friends in college, right? Like they're all applying for jobs, all applying for internships, right? And they're all being asked, like, how have been you using AI in the classroom? And they're just so concerned about how AI is going to like take over their jobs, but they don't realize like there are certain things that the AI cannot replicate, at least in today's age, which is qualities like storytelling and humor. Like now I'm having a conversation with you guys on here. I'm not reading off an AI tool, right? Like you can't just I'm not replicating a prompt. So like one question that I wanted to ask the both of you, because you both are 8th grade teachers, which is when the basics are being instilled into the children. So what do you think are like effective strategies that humanities and social sciences teachers can use to make sure that all their students are on the right track when incorporating AI? Like how, like to make sure that they're using AI correctly? Like how would you distinguish between the correct and incorrect use of AI while learning new concepts? John, would you like to go first?
Sure. I mean, one thing, and I've said this in the conversations. First of all, Sarah, that was awesome. And the fact that we didn't know about each other's presentations and there was so much affinity, I think either we're both wrong or we're both right. I'm not sure, but we'll have to see. I think to your question, one thing I've been saying to folks at my school is that this is maybe a late in the first semester or early second semester tool. And so there's a lot of norms that I'm going to want to continue to work on in my classroom before I'm turning my students loose on any of these things. And so I think there's a incremental or scaffolded approach that students learn in the same way that, for example, I teach research. I think this is a useful example. When I first started teaching research, it was sort of Wikipedia was off limits, and now I teach students how to use Wikipedia, how it can be used well, how it can be misused, and what are responsible ways to use that site. But I don't teach that in September. First, we use sort of more reliable sources, or sources I'm providing, or sources our librarians providing. And so with any educational tool, I think there's, as I mentioned, sort of just a scaffolded approach to how we use these things. On the flip side, I do think we're going to be facing a real murky territory around integrity and corner cutting and when is it appropriate to use these tools and when is it not, and how can students sort of get away with things. And so, you know, 8th graders are pretty inclined to try to get away with things. And so I think I'm not quite sure how that's going to go this fall. I think we had the benefit last spring of, you know, a few of my students knew about it and some kids didn't. And then when I showed it to them, I was like, this is some cool ways to use it. Here's how I'm using it. Here's how you might use it. Let's tinker with it. But it wasn't yet sort of mainstream. And there's probably a kid who's going to be in my class this fall who spent all summer figuring out how to use it and not be caught. And so, again, I think that's a fool's errand to try to catch kids. And I think, you know, you heard both Sarah and I allude to that. And so on some level, students are only cheating themselves. And then I think the flip side is, and I deleted the slide from my presentation, but I'll stop talking in a moment. But the, you know, students cheat in my experience when they are panicked or when they don't feel like the work they're being asked to do is meaningful. And so if you can help students avoid panic by building their skills and helping them plan and do all the things good teachers do. And if you help them, you know, as Sarah's really awesome example goes, I mean, you saw the emphasis went away from content and into why does this matter for me? And that I think is a way to say to students, like, I care about your thinking and I value what you have to say. And these tools can't do that yet. And hopefully students won't want to use them for that because they see that their teachers and peers really are invested in what they think.
John, I totally agree about scaffolding. I think that is a huge part of middle school and elementary school too, primary school. Obviously ChatGPT is for 13 to 18-year-olds. So I think our elementary colleagues would have a different view, but the scaffolding is critical. Two very nitty-gritty things that I plan to do. And I agree with John that I don't want to keep up with the cat and mouse game of trying to catch generative AI. I just don't think it's going to work. It's going to outstrip our capacity, and it probably already has to catch it. But two things I'm going to do at the beginning of the year. One is that I always create a Google folder for each student. So for me, it'd be like Sarah Cooper, 8th History and Civics, and then I share it with them. And I have been not so good about asking them to create all of their documents in that folder, but I'm going to really emphasize that. Now, you can still get around it. You could create text in another file and then paste it in, but then you'd see this whole block of text appearing. So I'm definitely going to encourage that, and then I can check the version history, which I have done in the past for all kinds of research, not just for ChatGPT, to make sure that students are sufficiently paraphrasing and addressing the sources that they've got. The second thing that I am definitely going to do is to have a writing sample at the beginning of the year. And I kind of already have that. Like, I asked students to write a few things about themselves for me. But I think on the first day, I might even, we usually do a current events activity where students try to look at current events and think about, well, what if this news didn't exist and how would it affect the world? So I'm going to have them, I think, reflect in writing in class just for 10 or 15 minutes on how they follow the news or how they don't follow the news. And then I'll have that. And then I might have them do another assignment as well, just so I have a sense of their writing. That's just good teaching anyway, to know who the students are I have in my classroom. But I'm hoping those will provide some sort of baselines. And just more broadly, I agree, if we can try to instill motivation in some way to not use ChatGPT all the time. And also, I think humor plays a role here. Last year, I had lots of kids, this group of kids who at the break, they would go and they'd try to see if they could get ChatGPT to do crazy things. And I'd be like, okay, guys, you know, enough of that here. I know you're doing it at home. But if we can talk about it and be open about what they actually are doing with ChatGPT, and I would say, oh, tell me what you're doing. Which prompts did you use? Like, I would love to know. And they're like, oh, you don't even want to know the prompts we're using. I said, okay, well, I really don't want to know. But if I can be curious about what they know, I think that also helps me learn and helps them know that I'm kind of up on what's going on.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, you know, just like following up with you guys, right? There's a question from Michael Wakefield. It's for either of you all, or if like both of you guys would like to answer it, is that which is potentially the greater threat to education, humanities and social sciences in particular, generative AI or the increasingly anti-education culture, or worse yet, the combination of the two? Pretty interesting question, yeah.
Just to mix things up, you want me to go, and then Jonathan, you can go after that? Not that I have a great answer. I think that's a wonderful question. You have a lot of really amazing people listening to this panel. I think anti-education culture is obviously a broad term. I prefer, as an administrator and a teacher, I prefer not to say these are threats, but these are chances for us to expand how we teach. I know that sounds pretty euphemistic, but if we just think of it as threats, I think it'll just make us scared. And I would much rather go into all of this from a perspective of strength, open-mindedness, curiosity. I do think that the world in which we live, especially for history teachers, is a very unusual world. In my 20+ years of teaching, over the past several years, current events used to be sort of fun and light to discuss a decade ago. And for many, many reasons, it now seems like they are incredibly important and also sometimes a third rail. And so I think a lot in my class about how to have civilized conversations, even down to giving students, sentence stems for how to disagree and how to talk to each other. There are all kinds of great organizations out there promoting that kind of dialogue. So I see that as maybe more incremental, the world in which we live in, and the views that certain people have on education, what can be taught. I see AI as incremental, but also there's, the 10% or whatever percent chance that humanity could be totally destroyed by it. So that might be more apocalyptic, but I can't really deal with that day to day. So I just need to sort of focus on the students in my class and do what I can with them.
I think that's great. I'm going to choose to say both, which is typically my response to these kinds of prompts. And I think both because, you heard both of us talk about sort of coming from the humanities and wanting our students to discover who they are as people and be curious about other people. And so I think both generative AI and the increasingly anti-education culture and the larger culture wars could be interpreted as being aimed against the idea that we should just be curious and thoughtful about other people. And so I see them both sort of as a threat to that model, but also, as a teacher, that's what makes me want to be in the classroom with students is, helping them develop the habits of mind and skills that they need to be good people and good citizens and thoughtful about technology, about other people, and, about the world.
John, I love that emphasis on connection. That was a great answer.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I would also like to mention that we have Ashley on here. I'd like to give a brief introduction to our student panelist. Ashley Lynn is an incoming senior from Mission San Jose High School. I think she's from California, just like Sarah. And she is passionate about neurodiversity inclusion, Taiwanese representation, and providing food to those in need. In the future, she aspires to be a medical doctor, so she has a lot of studying to do. But yeah, nice to meet you, Ashley. Would you like to, unmute yourself and talk a little bit more about your experience and interaction with AI, and something you feel educators are not aware about and you would like to, see implemented in educational policies?
Okay, so as a high school student, I've seen a lot of people using AI, whether it be for studying purposes or for cheating purposes. So I realized that AI could be both bad and good. But one thing teachers don't realize is that some teachers, they use the AI checker things, but then sometimes they aren't accurate. Sometimes a student could have used AI to write the entire thing, but the AI checker said it's 100% human. And then sometimes the student could have not used AI at all. And then the checker would be like, hey, this is all written by AI. And then that student would get a 0 on their essay, which I feel is pretty unfair. And there is one thing, even if you try to take away AI, I feel like students, especially high school students, because in the chat, as you guys mentioned, they use AI because they're panicking, they cheat because they're panicking. They'll always find a way around it. So there's kind of, even if you do take away AI, I don't think it will take away the issue of cheating. And also AI can be really beneficial for certain purposes, such as studying purposes. So teachers could actually use AI because they have a really good way of detecting and finding what certain level the student is at, academic level. So then they can generate customized question for the student, which could really support the student in many ways. Yeah, that's it.
Oh yeah, sure. And I felt that Ashley was also, trying to cover the fact that to ask the question, what exactly do we even consider ethical, right? because a lot of professors were first very scared about how Google is out, and everyone's going to Google their answers and cheat on assignments. And now we have AI. So I would like to ask John and Sarah if they have any opinion on what exactly can be considered ethical and not ethical, and what do you think are solutions to prevent the cheating so that there is learning involved? Do you think there's presentations, verbal presentations that students must do, or like any other suggestions you have? John or Sarah? Okay, John.
I'll go. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to come at this and broaden the question too. I think there's an even bigger question when, so I have students in my class who have tutors. I have students in my classroom who have parents who work in the material we're studying, who have older siblings who've taken the class before. And so there isn't a level playing field in any sense of the word. And so I think having students have access to the same set of tools can be a powerful tool, way of creating equity among students. And so I sort of flip the question on its head and say, how do we help all students access these things equally? And so I think there's that place too. And I think this maybe is going to sound crazy, but I think right now my students might turn something in and I'll say, like, how could you have used, ChatGPT for this assignment? And I think 5 years from now, I might be saying, how could you have turned in this assignment without running it through something like ChatGPT or something else that would have helped you catch these errors or refine these things, that sort of thing. And so, I think we're always working in collaboration. When I was a student, I hand wrote things. By high school, I was typing things. By college, I was doing it with autocorrect and spell check. And so I think even seeing this as something as a total departure, I think it's more the gray area of how do you use these tools well? Again, to Sarah's, I think, really excellent point, how do you show your trail of thought as you embrace these tools? And so I think asking students to be really transparent about things. And then also, if you looked at the flow chart that I showed, the first question is like, do I have my teacher's permission to use a tool like this? And so I think if you are in a classroom where trust is high and students believe in what you're trying to get them to do, ideally they will follow that first question, and if the answer is no, they won't go to these tools. So the ethics I think is important, but I think it's also a bigger question about sort of reflection and metacognition and trust, as I see it. I do think my class is very discussion based, and so you can fudge your writing thing, you can have ChatGPT write a summary for you, you can do all of that, but when you show up in class and can't participate because you didn't actually understand it, I think there's something there. And I really loved what Sarah said too about writing to discover what we think and writing to learn. These are great tools for getting text out, but they're not a great tool for discovering what you really think about something. And so if we ask students to do that, then they have to be in conversation with one another and they have to be reflective.
John, I really like what you said about making sure that students have an equal playing field or an equitable playing field. And Ashley, I think what you were saying about the wide availability of tutoring is going to be a help with that. And I loved all of what you said, Ashley, and I just kept thinking, agree. I'm not disagreeing with any of that about AI detection or anything that you said. So thank you for all of those thoughts. I want to broaden the question a little bit. This is something that I read recently, which is that if you have AI, it is maybe hurting the students at the top the most. And this is something I'm still wrapping my head around, which is why I'm bringing it up, because let's say you have a fantastic writer and AI continues to develop until it mimics that great writing skill that a student has. That student is somehow, that talent that they have is not necessarily as valued as it was. So I just wanted to put that out there to broaden the question maybe a little bit differently. But going back to the idea of plagiarism, I really think that we as teachers need to define and redefine assignments and assessments so that we are living in a world in which it's not as traditional anymore. And I know a lot of teachers have been doing very non-traditional learning for a long time, project-based, problem-based, whatever you want to call it. But I think this is a clarion call saying, hey, this doesn't work anymore. The traditional is not going to get students where they need to go because they may not be doing the work. So I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see educational assessments change unless a student is in a room and has a test and pen and paper, a standardized test or whatever else. And I have to say for college teachers in large sections and hundreds of people, I I don't know how they're going to do it. I mean, maybe they'll rely on TAs a lot, as they already do, but I feel like John and I are lucky to be able to have students in front of us, students we know, and so we can kind of know who they are and see the work they do. But I think we're entering an amazing age of education in which the number of creative approaches to learning are just going to expand by the week.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's also this one very interesting question. Since you guys are very well versed with the concept of AI, this would be clear the concept in other people's heads as well. So this question is actually from Cynthia. How early can AI be introduced to children? And do you think that they should, like, do we need parent permission for that? What's your take on that?
I think it's just if you go to their website, it says that you need parental consent for if you're between 13 and 18. And so I know some schools have an acceptable use policy that's signed by parents, or it's in the contract if it's an independent school. So I think there are different ways that schools are getting at that, or students can choose to use ChatGPT on their own, but a teacher wouldn't require it if there's not parental consent. That's my understanding. John, is that yours as well, or is there anything else?
Yeah, I'm so at our school, as I think was mentioned, I'm sort of leading our school's investigation of all this stuff, and I'm co-clerking that committee with a member of our tech department. And in every meeting, she'll say, and actually, just remember that use of these things violates our school's ethical use policy, and so we're having to update a lot of those things there. I think on the sort of larger developmental question of like when can kids start learning to use some of this stuff, I think I'm going to say is, 8th grade to me feels like the right place to start playing around. I think it's my age group and the kids I love playing with the most. I think, I have an 8-year-old and I see very little benefit to them getting into this stuff at this point as they're finding their voice as a writer. We have done some fun, AI image generating stuff just to sort of play around a bit. And certainly they've heard me talk about it enough to know that it's out there. But I think older, middle grades, I think is the right time to really teach the skill. I think there's some play and some fun that can be done earlier on, but that would be my answer to that.
Mm-hmm. And to even build on that question, right? Like, because we want to conclude with a few immediate steps that the attendees here can take in their own schools. So how do you think the use of AI should be like scaffolded in a K12 school, right? Like, what are some immediate steps that the attendees can take within their own organizations? Would Sarah or Jonathan want to add on to that, or?
Sure, I'll give it a go, and then I know, Jonathan, you've been thinking about this in the committee that you're clerking as well. I think number one is just to keep up with it. I know a lot of companies are appointing AI specialists just to keep up with the latest developments, and so like I'm making a goal for myself just to like read an article every week or two about AI in education specifically, to know what our students are finding and what we don't know that they're doing. Number two, I think if you're an individual teacher, you need to go through all of your assignments, and you're a teacher of probably 8th through 12th grades, right? That you need to go through your assignments and think, which assignments can I keep for this year and which ones absolutely have to be updated because they are so doable with ChatGPT. And I wouldn't get overwhelmed because you won't be able to overhaul your entire curriculum in a year, probably. It'll be slow, but what are the sirens that are calling to you to fix? And then lastly, I would think about how do you want to pitch yourself as a school? What's your stance on AI? And I think schools would benefit from saying, our stance is that we're welcoming this as an interesting educational tool, even while we're aware of its pitfalls, and we want you to be partners in the process. Parents, guardians, students, faculty, staff, everybody else.
Yeah, Sarah's last point was what I was gonna say is I think if you're a teacher and your school has not issued or promised to issue guidance or guidelines on all of this, I think you have to demand that and ask people or write it yourself if no one is going to give it to you. One thing we're doing is we're going to create a pilot group of teachers who want to tinker and play and sort of be on the vanguard, whether that means we're going to say, yes, we're going to use this and love it, or whether we're going to say this doesn't fit into, our school's vision. And so I think that sort of cohort model, I think is going to work well in a school like ours. And I think, just as Sarah said too, like get in there and explore and play around, because I think the better we can see how our students might be, using it for ill and then also for good, I think will only help us as pedagogues and school leaders.
Yeah, for sure. And guys, I actually just received a message from our team that we're actually at a time crunch. And I apologize that we could not cover all the questions that were in the Q&A and in the chat. I like to mention that these sessions are very short, right? And since there are many questions that you guys still have, I'd really like to encourage you all to join our networking and brainstorming session, which is in the next 10 minutes at 2 p.m. Central Time, where you guys have the opportunity to brainstorm and network with the speakers and the educators later. So yeah, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to the speakers after the conference. Also, I'd like to add that we will be sending out a conference report and a recordings of all our sessions, which should ideally summarize our takeaways from the sessions. So yeah, the questions that are asked in the Q&A section and even in the chat, they're recorded. So we will try our best to follow up on as many of them as possible in the conference report. So once again, thank you so much for being on here, and really appreciate your time. So yeah, thank you, and good luck for the rest of the conference. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, Ashley. Kunark,
Thanks,
Jonathan.
Ashley. Thanks, Sarah. Kunark.
Pleasure.
Thank you.